Hi, Zach. We are so excited to have you on our show today and share your immense knowledge about all things water and water filtration. I first heard you on a workshop through the Journey of Intrinsic Health program and community that I'm a part of. And I just knew immediately we had to have you come on our show. And while we've talked a little bit about water and toxins and why this is important, we haven't fully dove in and dedicated an entire episode, which is what we're going to do today. And, I feel like it's such an overwhelming topic, yet we shouldn't really have to be thinking about this, right? Everyone should have clean water. But here we are. So thank you so much for joining us.
I agree. And thanks for having me. It's, I love doing these. I love having conversations about this, and it's a complex topic, and it's kind of like looking under the hood of a car when you don't know anything. It can be hard, but we can make it a little bit easier. So
Yes.
Thanks.
Well, that will be our goal today.
Awesome.
So before we dive in and talk more about water, we have one question for you. If you were to treat yourself to something special today, no financial constraints, no time constraints, what would you do?
Oh, man. I love to travel, and something I've actually always wanted to do is just go and hop on a plane and fly somewhere with no plan in mind, just totally spontaneous.
Wow.
So I think that would be something I would probably do. I don't know. That would be, yeah.
You know what? That actually sounds really freeing and fun.
Yeah.
And like liberating, because I'm such a planner. So for me, that would actually be a really good test of like,
especially if it was your own plane, right? Like hop on your own plane and just be like, take me here. Take
totally
me to Paris.
Spontaneous. Yeah, it would be amazing. Go somewhere I haven't been.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome.
Very fun.
Could you provide some pivotal moments and experiences that have influenced your career journey and led you to the high-end water filtration industry? And I know you're so passionate about it, and you're very interested in also like the research and the development and the education. So can you, in a nutshell, kind of take us through your path?
Yeah. I had never really thought about, if you asked me 5 years ago or even 7 years ago, if I thought I would be in water filtration, I would probably think you were crazy. It just wasn't something that was even on my radar. And of course, my father, he's been quite a pioneer in the space of biomimicry and structured water and the energetics of water and agriculture. And he devoted a lot of his life to water, and kind of understanding how important it is as a foundation in our health. And so I worked in healthcare since I was 18 years old. I was a paramedic in Los Angeles and a firefighter paramedic in Seattle area, and then flight paramedic in this area. And of course, that's more emergency medicine. But being in that space and then having a family that's into the natural health space, the older I got, the more that, I think the older we get, the more we kind of focus on like, what are we putting into our bodies? What are the supplements that we're taking? What are the things we need to be paying attention to? We want to be healthy for ourselves, but also for our kids, our families. And so I think my mindset just started to shift a little bit more into natural health. And then, of course, towards the end of COVID, I exited the fire service and went into the family business with my dad. And that was really a pivotal moment to where I was like, wow, water is incredibly important. I mean, we're mostly made of water. It's the most important and the most complex fluid on the face of the planet. It's where life comes from. And so I gained a lot more respect for water, and also a lot more awareness of what's in our water and what we're putting into our bodies. And, and kind of looking at the big picture, I noticed that a lot of people, because I was on my own health journey, I noticed a lot of people will look to supplements and different things, to improve their health, but it didn't seem like a lot of people were really looking at water, which seemed so foundational to me. And so I really, when I started to get into water filtration and actually really seeing what was in our water and how things get there, it made me really want to spread more awareness of the importance of water. And it's something we just take for granted. It's just a clear fluid. We I drank out of the hose growing up, never thought about it, and now I'm like, it's something that I think about all the time. Like, what's in this water? Where's it coming from? How is it affecting my health? And it's very crucial, I think, to be aware of it, because it's where all of our health journey should start. And so that's kind of evolved over the past several years into, where I am now, and being able to share this with others is really probably one of the best parts of this, I think, at least helping people be aware and understand just the basics. It doesn't have to be hard.
I mean, I agree with you completely. And I feel like water is something we don't think about often. And even when you were just talking about the hose, like I was thinking about a situation I was in recently with my son who lives in Chicago, the other Zach. And I went to get a glass of water at his place, and he was like, "Oh, our sink water's great." And in my head, I was, he's 23 and I wasn't going to burst his bubble in that moment in his new place. But in my head, I'm thinking, how do you know? Have you researched the water in the city that you just moved to? And and I think a lot of people, my whole point of this story is that a lot of people think that, oh, I live in a good city, a good area of the city, and the water's fine. And they don't think about what is really in the water. And I know in a lot of cities, you can actually get the reports of what's in the water, but then do you understand what that means? Like what all the numbers and things that they say about your city water actually mean. So I'm assuming we're going to be talking about that.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I think kind of going off of that, when people drink water and it tastes good, they just assume that this is good water because it tastes good. And there's really only a couple things that can be in the water that make it taste bad. Most of the bad things don't taste like anything. You can have water that tastes crystalline and pure and amazing, and it might be full of toxins, and you just don't know. And so I understand that, because I used to think that way. I would drink from someone's faucet and I'd be like, this water is great, but it's there's so much more. So
yeah, this is a good segue. If we can, like I said, we hadn't dedicated an entire episode to this on toxins in water and how to remove it. But can you just give us a high level overview, kind of where you were just going? Like, why do we need to be focused on, why is it so important to prioritize clean water, especially in your house where you spend most of your time, where you're bathing, where you're cooking, where you're drinking? Just start out there. Like, what did you find when you started diving into water that is so problematic and has potential and known health concerns?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did your viewpoints change over time, like you said?
Yeah. Well, the one thing coming into Greenfield Water, of course, like most of our customers are in the natural health space. They're really into natural health. And as I was, conversing with a lot of people every day, a lot of people come to us once they're sick. They come to us once their practitioner, their doctor says, you need a water filter. And a lot of people don't usually start with water on their health journey. They start with something else. They start with medication, or they start with a natural supplement or something else. But if you look at water, so let's just take someone with a hormone imbalance, right? And they may start taking hormone replacement or different things to balance those. But there's so many toxins in the water that are very powerful hormone disruptors. Arsenic is one example. Arsenic is very prevalent in the US, and it's a hormone disruptor. And if you're drinking this to stay hydrated, you're constantly fighting whatever it is else that you're doing to help with that issue. And that's just one example of hundreds of how water can affect your health. And so if you're going to start on a health journey, it has to start with water, because you can take one step forward and two steps back as long as you're drinking water that's not in a safer state. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be safer. You have to you need to focus on at least doing your best to get it filtered. And I drink a lot of water. I drink probably a gallon and a half a day. And so, I have for a long time. And I think knowing that too kind of put that in more perspective for me too, because, you have these guidelines for I think 8 glasses of water a day is kind of the standard. And they say, well, there's certain amounts of contaminants that are safe in the water. okay, is that drinking 8 glasses of water a day, or what's going to happen if I drink 1.5 gallons? So I just started to think about that a lot more. And then, being in this business and actually being able to look at city reports and what's in the water, if someone's a fear monger, it's not going to do them any favors, because it can look pretty scary. All the stuff that we see in our water, chemical byproducts, pesticides. Not only that, like birth controls in the water, heart medications. And a lot of cities are actually, they're taking even sewage water and they're filtering it and through very high-end process and putting it back into, and it doesn't get everything out. And they're putting it back into and these larger cities. So it's gross. And water can taste great and be completely disgusting and terrible for you. And I think that really I didn't really think a lot about that until I started to actually really dig into water education and seeing what's in the water and going to conferences and seeing how hard technology is trying to work to fix a problem that's honestly getting worse. So it's been sort of an evolution over time of just being more aware of what's in the water and kind of seeing all the health problems that can stem from bad water that you don't really hear a lot about that when you're in most like natural health circles. You hear a lot about different supplements that you can take. You hear a lot about other things. And I think it is growing now. There is a growing awareness for sure. But it seems like it should be the first thing that people address, to me. That's how I feel.
So when obviously I'm going to just go out on a limb here and guess that most cities, the water is not up to standard, in your opinion. What about if you're like in Colorado and you're hiking in the mountains and you come across this beautiful stream that's, come from the waterfalls and the rainfall, and what do you think about that kind of water? Like, are we to the point on our planet where there's no freshwater sources anywhere, in your mind?
Well, there's studies that have come out that have shown, and there's a few things about spring water. Spring water is obviously alive. It's full of oxygen. It's incredibly invigorating. But, and something that hasn't changed over time is that there could be animal waste nearby that may have put E. coli in the water. So there's still things you have to be careful of that haven't changed over time. But I would say one of the big things that's changed is there are studies that have been done that have shown that because of airborne pollution, that pretty much doesn't really matter how remote the spring is. Most spring water will have some sort of forever chemical in it, like PFOA, PFOS, stuff like that.
That makes me so sad.
I know.
Yeah, no, but at the same time, I say that, and when I say all this stuff talking about the water, I'm not trying to induce fear into people to just like sprint and get it. I don't like to approach health that way. If I found a spring on a mountaintop, I would probably drink from it. I'm not going to worry too much about that. But it is good to be aware of it and to know that most water in the world is polluted now, to some extent. That doesn't mean it won't be, it won't sustain your health and give you energy and stuff, but it's just something to be aware of, I think.
Yeah. And maybe this is where we can kind of dive in a little bit and talk more about what you're doing at Greenfield Water. Like, what is structured water? That's something that we haven't talked about. I don't know that a lot of our listeners know what it is, but I know it's something that you're focused on and how you're trying to mimic what's like natural water as our bodies were evolved to consume, right?
Yeah. So I like to explain it in the most simple terms possible, in that it is really pure biomimicry. There are many different ways to structure water. I think the best way is to copy exactly how nature does it. I think when we start to align with nature and we become closer to nature, we become healthier mentally, physically, spiritually, across the board. I think that's the absolute truth. The farther we get from nature and the more that we try to do things in a man-made way, we start to lose that connection to nature, and then collectively we'll start to decline. So the idea of structured water is when you take water, like rainfall, for instance. Rainfall is usually acidic, doesn't have any minerals in it. It falls into the earth and goes through what's called like the hydrologic cycle. It gets absorbed into the ground, comes up through springs, through a natural filtration process, and then, flows down mountains. What's happening during this whole process is the water is getting minerals. It's getting energy. We know that natural minerals emit energy, high amount of energy. And we also know that when water is traveling down mountains and stuff, and everything in nature operates through vortices, right? If you look at a hurricane, tornado, you look at eddies in the water, there's vortices everywhere. This is actually really important for the movement of water. And it creates a high amount of energy in the water. And so when you take water that's been drawn up into a spring after it's gone through this whole process, it's very energized. And what they've noticed is that there's a hexagonal arrangement of molecules in the water. So this consistent arrangement of molecules in the water causes the water to have a higher permeability. And it's also how the water's found in our cells. They've done, University of Washington has shown this too, that the water inside of our cells is structured. The water inside fruit is structured. This is like the final stage of water. And so this water it's more easily absorbed into our cells. We're hydrated more easily. It's better at removing toxins. We see also a lot of other effects with structured water, even in commercial settings.
Can I ask you a quick question before you continue on that? So when you say the water in our cells is structured, you're talking about that physical hexagonal shape, however you say it, hexagonal or whatever shape that is the structure that you're referring to?
Yeah, it's structured in that what they've noticed is that when water travels through straight pipes with right and left angle turns, it causes the molecular or the arrangement of molecules in the water to become very chaotic, and they bounce around and the permeability of the water is lowered. Why is this? Well, if we look in nature, nothing really runs in perfect symmetry. There's no river that runs in a perfect mathematical symmetry. The only thing that does that is man-made pipes. And, if you also look at, that's one thing that destructures water. That's one thing that takes the energy from water. In addition to that, one thing that we've also discovered is that water is like a malleable computer. It's able to receive information and store that information. It's also able to output information. And so if there's negative information, and this goes into some, this can be shown, in the research level, but also like Dr. Masaru Emoto also devoted a lot of his life to this study as well, as far as like how water is affected by outside energy, whether that's negative energy or positive energy. And, a lot of people, I would have thought this was so woo-woo and out there, 10 years ago, but it's very valid now. And, we've shown that, plants, when spoken to in a certain way or around a certain energy, will do, worse or better than plants over here with a different energy. So water's the same way. And so when the water travels through these pipes and goes through these chemical processes at water treatment facilities, the water's sick. It is not in a state that's ready to invigorate us and lend to our life force energy. And so really, what my father's goal was to go out and find out how he could create something that is completely aligned with nature, that will bring this water back to its state where it was in a spring on a mountain. And, doing that is totally possible with biomimicry. And what we basically do is we sort of copy the hydrologic cycle we see in nature. And one of the big influences in this technology was Victor Schauberger, who was an Austrian forester. And one of the biggest things he said was comprehend and copy nature. And he did some incredible work, and he revolutionized the forestry industry as well, just by using biomimicry and things that he found in nature that he could copy. Basically, what my dad created was a vortex or energizer. So the water goes through a flow tube that has a triangular formation of quartz spheres or glass spheres. And that mimics how water travels in nature, through rocks around, where it's gathering energy as it flows. And this is called toroidal vortexing. And then from there, it goes through a resonance chamber, which is going to mimic the natural energy that's emitted from minerals in the environment. And so all this
Are there
information is
minerals
being,
in the chamber that you've created?
there are, yes, there's,
Okay.
yeah, almost every element on the periodic table of elements. It's
Wow.
in a certain ratio, and there's a lot of intention that goes into this. Because again, you know, my father believed that intention was very important in this whole thing too. You know, the intention that you're giving to the water, and so there's a very careful process of creating, very mindful process of creating these vortexers. So it goes through the physical toroidal vortexing, which is more of like the violent movement of water, the aggressive movement of water as it would travel down a stream.
Yeah.
And then it goes through a resonance chamber, which is emitting a very, very positive, subtle electromagnetic frequency to the water. The water picks up this information, and you know, we do a lot of trials in agriculture and with livestock and poultry, and the results we see are astounding. It's almost unbelievable that a device that you just sit there and never have to touch again can do this to the water. And most people, I think we've kind of been conditioned to believe that you have to plug something in, or we have to like electrocute it. And there's different ways that you can do that. But why, you know, if we can get similar results, and especially in agriculture, the most incredible results, by putting something that is basically using a non-sacrificial energy on a crop and bringing the crop to market sooner, it has more vigor, the fruit tastes better, it's larger, it's incredible. And so we see that there's pretty profound effects when we take water from its state, like bulk water, which is tap water from your sink, and you run it through a device that basically is mimicking that full hydrologic cycle in nature in a pass-through, and then giving you something that's really just incredible. I mean, you know, in irrigation, because of the increased permeability and properties of the water, farmers use 30% less water, and they're getting 15 to 100% increase in crop yield. And this would be the same thing as if they had been able to use spring water, but just because of the way our world is, that's not accessible everywhere. And so,
Wow.
This is like
This is so
fascinating. And I feel like your
interesting.
dad
Yeah.
was brilliant.
yeah,
And
he's
why isn't this more widespread? But I guess even just going back to like the examples you're giving with the farmers, can you dive in and talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in these studies and how that's then impacting the food that we eat? Because obviously that's a whole nother topic that we've talked about many times, but like with the
Yeah.
food that we're eating, not having as many minerals as it did years ago.
Yeah,
And do you
no,
have to
it's
drink less water if you're drinking this water? If you're drinking structured water, how does that impact how much your body actually needs at a cellular level?
Yeah, a good way I think about it is that when you're drinking straight water from the tap or even filtered water, it's more of an irrigation. Your water doesn't absorb it to the extent that it would if that water were in a perfectly balanced natural state. And so it does equate out to 30% less water consumption. So it is absorbed faster. It's used more effectively by your body because your body has to spend less energy to put that water in a state that it can use it. Another example of this would be like, I don't have anything against RO at all, but if you take RO water and you don't mineralize it, ROs are designed to remove minerals from the water, so it creates an acidic environment. And so if you just drink RO water, it's very low energy and has no minerals. And so the water has to work to put those minerals back in, and it will take it from the food you've eaten or your bones or your teeth over time. And then it has to also so your body is spending more energy than it should to put that water into a state where ideally we should be able to drink water, and our body shouldn't have to do as much work in order to get it to a state where it can use it. And so that's why it equates out to less water for hydration, because the water is already in a more balanced state. And so one of the things we see in agriculture is increased nutrient density in the soil. We see the water, because of the higher permeability, is diving deeper into the ground and staying there longer. So we do a lot of farms in Saudi Arabia that have very sandy soil, sandy, dry soil, and their crop yields are unbelievable because the water is able to stay in the ground longer, and they're able to use less of it because of that. And so we see similar, you know, a lot of our poultry and livestock trials are more anecdotal because those are harder for us to run an actual trial on. We rely on a lot of our distributors to run these trials. And so, you know, what we've noticed is a preference for cows, for instance, preference for the cows to drink from a trough has structured water in it. animals intuitively know what's better for them. And we've also noticed that with our harmonizer, which is the resonance portion of our vortexer, we put it in a cow trough. We also noticed almost no bacteria build up in the trough over time, whereas the other trough, if it's stagnant, will build up bacteria. And this is because it's a higher energy environment. And I was going to mention another thing that can destructure water. We talked about the straight pipes, is if you look at a pond in nature that's stagnant, with mosquito larvae and stuff, it's very important for the ecosystem to have that, and it has a purpose in nature, but you wouldn't want to drink from it because the water is stagnant. It's been sitting and it's been destructured, and there's heat coming onto it. And so these are part of the vortexer is the water in movement, because movement creates energy. And that's, an important aspect of it as well. So we see a lot of pretty incredible things, I'd say, mostly in agriculture, because we're able to actually use scientific methodology and measure. It's very hard to quantify something that has an energetic component to it. It has an intentional component to it. It's also, our Western minds are very closed off to the idea that there's invisible properties here that are affecting the water. We want to see something on paper. We want to see lab values. We want to see proof. That's just how we are as a culture. But that's just the smallest portion of it. There's so much more that goes into, in every area of our life, I think, into the invisible properties, invisible energies. And water is no exception. It's the pinnacle of that. And I think that we have, agronomists that will be very hesitant to put this on a crop, because they have a big responsibility to see this crop succeed. And if you have a 1,000-acre farm that uses irrigation and it fails because of a device that they got that's so woo-woo, well, they're in some deep water. And so they're hesitant. And so there's a challenge there for us. But for the farms that do take this leap and put it on, I mean, they're just blown away. And a lot of them just want to keep it a secret because the effects are so astounding. And so this is really, obviously seems like too good to be true. This is amazing. But in reality, all it is just us coming a little closer to nature. It's us aligning a little bit more with nature. There's a quote someone said that said, try to spend 20 minutes a day in nature, and if you don't have the time, spend an hour, or something along those lines. And it's the closer that we can get and comprehend nature, which can be difficult because we're so far away from that as humans. There's so much immense power and energy that's contained within the earth and everything that we need to sustain life. And it will always do a better job than anything man could create. And this is just a small piece of starting to understand those concepts and grow closer to those concepts. And it is incredible technology, but it's a tough one to sell because of the aspects of it that are hard to quantify.
So I have so many questions with everything you just said. But one thing I just really want to know is, do you talk to your water? Like, are you like you mentioned talking to the plants, and we had a guest on our episode this week that talks about, talking to the trees and hugging the trees. And it's just kind of all coming full circle. And I think about how the trees are all connected. They have this I think it's mycelium or some connection underground. It's this whole internet. And so now we're learning that the water is part of all of that, right?
Yeah, everything is intimately connected. And so I don't necessarily talk to my water all the time. There are times when I do, because I think it's a beautiful concept and there's absolute validity to it. And I think it's important, but I don't always do it. I think part of this whole journey is just having mindfulness and awareness in our moment to moment about what our intention is. The devices we put on our systems is really kind of a small part of that. It's a small way to speak to the water and to change the water and to improve the water, because most people just don't talk to their water, even though I think it's really important. But in our creation process for these vortexers, they do.
That's more what I meant. In the
yes. Oh, okay. I see. Yes.
The water.
Yes. Very, very.
I wasn't
process.
Picturing you talking to your glass of water.
I do. I do sometimes. I'm not afraid to admit it. It's just not something that I regularly do. But yes, in our manufacturing process, the environment is very important. And when we're creating the mix for the harmonizer, there's always positive intention and prayer that goes into that. And that was very important to my dad. And I know without a doubt that that's a crucial aspect of the outcome of the water and what these vortexers create. I think it's someone that anyone can make a structuring device to an extent. There are things about it that are very proprietary. But if you go in to create a vortexer with the intention of trying to just make a bunch of money or something like that,
Right.
it's really important with this type of technology to know where your intentions are and to be mindful of that, because ultimately that's what's going to create the best outcome.
So as I think, Stephanie and I both have reverse osmosis systems in our home that we spent a fair number of dollars on over time. And so, I'm picturing my teeth and my bones, like you said, I believe you said it's like seeping out of your, teeth and trying to compensate for where the water is lacking, if I understood that properly. So what is a person to do who like, what do you recommend for the average person that's, look at your city water, like just know that the city water is not going to be good. Like, have you found a city that has acceptable water?
There are some cities, in my time of working here, looking at thousands upon thousands of reports, there have been a few where I've been like, wow, that water is actually pretty good. And one of them was in Alaska, in a small town.
No surprise.
Go figure,
And,
right? Though,
right.
But there have been a couple others. But the thing is, I think a reverse osmosis is great. It was created to do a good job at filtering water, and they do a good job at filtering water. The important thing to realize with any system, it doesn't matter if it's distillation, RO, ultrafiltration, whatever it is, most of them are marketed to us using the lab report, right? We go and we look and we say, oh, look at this, 99.9%. Those are a small piece of the puzzle, but you will rarely ever get anywhere close to what those reports are. And the reason is because those are performed in the lab in a controlled environment. They usually use acidic water of around 6.5 pH. That's because they're usually using RO water, which devoid of minerals is acidic. And then they're also running the water through these filters at a very, very, very low GPM or gallons per minute rate. So they're going to get good results. Now, what happens when you take that filter that you just bought because it has the most incredible results and you put it in your kitchen? You have a higher GPM flow in your kitchen usually than they would in the lab. The exception for this is RO, because RO usually does run at a lower GPM. That's why they have a tank, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then you have so many dynamics in an uncontrolled environment with city water that changes daily. If you look at a water report, it says 0.5 parts per billion of arsenic. It might be 1 parts per billion of arsenic tomorrow, and because it's always fluctuating because we're in an uncontrolled environment. And so it has to be taken with a grain of salt. They're good to look at to say, okay, it will address these different contaminants, but you absolutely can't expect it to perform to those levels. And in ROs, as same with all others, is no different. Sometimes you might get 65% arsenic removal or fluoride removal. Sometimes you might get 85%. But the goal and where we should keep our minds is that we have this here to make the water safer and as safe as possible. And that's the goal. You can't expect perfection with any filter. I'd say the closest you'd get would be distillation, but even distillation has its downfalls. VOCs can concentrate back in through the steam into the water, like volatile organic compounds. So nothing's perfect. So I think that's good to start with. But as far as RO is a great option. It does a good job filtering because the water is moving through it at a very slow rate. The issue is that it's also, because it is also designed to remove minerals from the water, people usually test an RO using a TDS meter, right? And the lower the TDS, they know that it's working. Well, TDS, if you run one of our filters through a TDS meter, it might be 200 and something, and people will be like, oh, it's not working. Well, that's because there's minerals still present in the water, and minerals will show up on a TDS scale. TDS is the total dissolved solids. And so minerals represent part of that. And so if you have really well mineralized water, there's some spring water that's almost 1,000 TDS because it's so full of minerals. It doesn't mean that it's bad. TDS is just a little piece of the puzzle. One way to over time, RO can start to leach minerals from your body. That's not like an immediate effect that's going to be super detrimental. That's more long term. But remineralizing the water is a big one. Some people put mineral drops in their RO water. I don't like the taste of that. But there are other ways to do it. A lot of ROs have an alkaline filter or a mineral filter that will put those minerals back in the water to balance that pH. So you're not drinking acidic water. That's important. One of the big problems with RO is the energetic side. When the water goes through these membranes, it's really because it's removing minerals. Minerals are what enhances the water. It gives it life, and it gives it life force energy. So that water is dead. It has no energy to it. It will not energize you. But it's okay, because ultimately the goal is to get these contaminants out of the water, right? But in order for it to really sustain us and to really give us the energy, we want to re-energize that water. We want to instill minerals back into it. And ideally, I'm obviously biased here, but running it through a vortexer, energizer. Well, and this is something we can quantify. We took water from an RO. Actually, we just took water from a regular bottle of water, and we put it through a GDV camera, which is gas discharge visualization. And you take a picture of it, and it measures the amount of energy that's released from an object. And then we put it through a vortexer energizer and ran the same test, and it was like fireworks exploding. And that's on our front page, so you can see that. And even that alone is just tells you how much you can increase the energetics of the water by using just a natural method. So RO water is completely fixable. The other problem with RO that you have to look at too is the tank, because as I talked about in nature, when you have stagnancy, right? So when you have acidic water is prime breeding grounds for microbes. And you put that in a tank, and then there's no movement in the tank, there's going to be bacteria growth in there. Big reason is because the spigot that you get your RO water from is a direct line to that tank. So if you're changing a kid's diaper, or you just have some germs on your hand, it's going to go right down in that tank. So it's important to sanitize them yearly. If you cut open an RO tank that hasn't been sanitized, it usually has a bunch of black sticky gunk in it. It's not necessarily going to kill you, but it's not great for you. So there's little nuances to every type of filtration, but ultimately the goal is whatever the end product of water you have, you just want it to have minerals in it, and you want it to have some life in it, and so it can sustain you. RO is very popular, so those are just good things to think about with RO water. We don't sell RO systems because of those challenges, and because we're using advanced ultrafiltration methods, and sometimes we can, sometimes RO is better, sometimes ultrafiltration is better. It depends on the system you're buying, and it depends on how you maintain it and everything like that.
Recently, the people that do our RO came out for their annual visit. I think it's annually. So are they testing for bacteria, like you said? And then also this year, I had them add minerals back, which they had never really offered before. But just in the last couple of years, I've been way more into the minerals. And so it was pretty nominal, because it lasts, he said, for 2 to 3 years. So he's adding back, and he showed me a list of all the minerals. So does that help?
That's great.
Yeah.
And the other reason that's important too is because if you have copper pipes or galvanized pipes in your house, and you don't have a mineralizer is it a whole house RO system?
Yeah, it's a whole house.
Yeah. So that acidic water, because what water does in nature and what our bodies do through, trying to achieve homeostasis, is it's going to try and pull minerals from wherever it can to bring that pH up. That's why when you run acidic water through copper pipes, the water might be blue in your bathtub, because it's trying to balance itself by pulling copper off, which is a mineral. Same thing with galvanized pipes. It'll pull lead off, it'll pull other things off. And so aside from just the health side of it, it's really important for just your plumbing to have balanced water with a mineralizer. And then the minerals are self-sacrificial, right? So if you put a mineralizer on, it's eventually going to empty out, because the water is going to be using it to balance the pH. And so really just monitoring your mineralizer, whenever someone says it's just a year replacement or 2-year replacement, that is a little bit subjective to how much water you used,
right,
and the pH of your water, which will vary a little bit. And so as long as you have a way to check those minerals, but as long as the minerals are there, that's what's important, because then that your pH is going to be more balanced.
So I feel, Zach, we could just go on and do this for another hour, but and we just may have to have you come back on for like a part 2. But let's say there's someone out there that doesn't either has like a very basic filtration system, maybe just under their sink, or maybe they're using a Brita. I mean, some of these like, just pitchers of water.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about what are the different options? What does it look like? What does the process look like to go through Greenfield water solutions? Is there like a, different tiers, if you will?
Yeah.
Affordability for
affordability.
young people.
Because I have a couple of clients that are like in their 20s that are starting to think about this, but and they want to just buy something little, and they're in an apartment, right? So they don't even want to invest because it's not where they're going to spend the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, no, a big part of what we do is conversations with customers. It's very hard for us to actually grow quickly because we have to ensure that we're having conversations with people. And part of what we do is education. And so if someone is unsure, let's say my budget's $300 for, we have options for everyone. And ultimately, what they can do is they can text or call the number on the site, and then someone will check their water. Let's see what's in your water. Do you have a lot of arsenic? Do you have a lot of fluoride? Do you have a lot of PFOA or whatever? And then they can help direct the customer, because when you go and buy a product from a site that's a water filter, it might make the water taste good, which is fairly easy to do. Any Brita pitcher can make the water taste good. But if people really want to get the stuff out of the water that's actually going to have a detrimental effect on their health, it's important that you get a right filter for it. There's many different types of filter medias. There's resins, there's different carbons, there's lots of stuff. And so what we can do is that we can kind of help guide the customer based off their budget of like, well, maybe you just need a countertop with this specific filter in it, and that will address the concerns in your water. It might not make it perfect, but unless you have a dialysis level machine, your water is not going to be completely perfect. It's okay if it's not. We just want to make the water as safe as possible. And so I would say for someone that really doesn't know, or they don't have direction, or they're unsure, have a conversation with someone, at that number. And they'll be able to help guide based off budget, and then based off of what's in the water. We can direct people as well to go to ewg.org, to the tap water database. Take a look at what's in their water. Bear in mind that's just a snapshot. It's going to fluctuate all the time, but at least we can say, okay, we know that arsenic's in their water, and we know that a high level of fluoride is in their water, and we can recommend a filter based off that.
Well, it sounds like you're meeting your customer where they're at. Which is great. And it's a very personalized approach.
Yeah. Which can be challenging too, because, sometimes there's a lot of people.
Yeah. But what a great service you're offering. And I mean, it really is making a difference to the lives of others. So
yeah, as long as it doesn't have to be everyone, but one person at a time, I think, is important. And water is getting worse in the world. Again, I don't like to fearmonger. I really don't like that at all, because it's very prevalent in the natural health community to run away from everything and hide from everything. And I understand it, but we just need to make the water safer, and it's totally possible to do on any budget. And we just try to make it less difficult.
Well, I hope at some point you can go after like all these cities, because we need, it's great to have your home, to have your system in your home, but then what if you're in a restaurant? What if you're traveling? Like there's all these other, times in the world where we're not drinking the water in our own home, or showering in the water in our own home. So I feel like it's like a bigger picture issue.
And I just have a question, actually, when you mentioned like tap water, drinking it at a restaurant. I was just in Europe. Is the water there better? Like if you're drinking tap water at a restaurant, because of the regulations, just with like the chemicals that are allowed in products in Europe versus in the United States. Do you have any insight to share on that? I'm just curious.
Generally speaking, the European Union and Europe in general does have higher standards than the US. Like even the US, we use NSF. European standards in some cases are more stringent than NSF, but it really depends where you are. Some cities have different standards. Some cities add fluoride over there, some don't. It's hard to say for sure that it's better, but I would say overall, Europe generally has higher standards for health related things than the US does as far as things that they allow in the water. But that would be, also another topic, which is public health guidelines and maximum contaminant levels and stuff, because it's challenging. In a sense, the standards aren't as high as they should be, but the local governments and state governments are faced with the very challenging situation too of the water being pretty bad. And that does go toward, it's because of also what we allow, there's Roundup going in the ground. There's all these chemicals going in the ground that are completely unchecked. And it will make its way back into your water. So
Right. Well, Zach, this conversation my mind is spinning. I could ask you a million more questions right now, but we have run out of time. So
we can talk again sometime.
Yes, that would be amazing. Where can people find you? Where can they purchase your systems or learn more about your system? I know you said you have a helpline that people can call and specifically ask about their own situation.
Yeah. We offer, even people with existing systems, we offer solutions for them to be able to add on to their stuff. We do sell a wide range of stuff. They don't just have to buy a system from us. Many times customers will call and be like, I want a good RO. We don't sell RO right now, so we'll direct them somewhere else. Our goal isn't really to sling products per se. It's really to help educate people, and then they can make a choice from that point where they want to go. And if that means them going somewhere elsewhere, we can guide them that way too. That's totally fine. But greenfieldwater.com is the website. And then the number that they can text or call is 208-462-0626. And texting is totally fine on that number too. Someone's always monitoring that as well. And there's also a chat on the site as well. And you don't have to know anything. You can just go and be like, I don't know what to get. And then maybe we can help guide you to find something that fits within your budget that'll at least help your water a little more.
So they shouldn't go to the EWG first and have an idea of
They can.
what their
Sure, yeah.
city. I feel like it'd be good to know what your city water is
Right.
before making that call, right? So you can
EWG
be more
is good.
targeted.
Yeah, no, 100%. EWG is good, but EWG sometimes misses stuff. So I would say EWG is good to go and kind of see how far over you are in certain things, but also just type in your city name. Like I live in Liberty Lake, Washington. So I would type in Liberty Lake, Washington City Water Report. And cities have to report it. Not necessarily every year. Some cities don't report it for a couple of years, but they're transparent. They will not leave things out they're required to put in there. So that's also a good spot to go. And that's just an easy search. And then if they don't know, sometimes cities have multiple water providers. Look on your water bill. Or if you live in an apartment, ask your apartment complex where the water treatment facility is. So in a big city, that's sometimes the case. You have to kind of dig a little bit, but those are the easy. If you can do that before, it does save a little bit of time, so that, you can just send them the link and be like, hey, here's my water. What do you think? Here's what I can afford.
Well, that's great information. And I mean, thank you guys for doing so much, because you're putting education above the business and the profits, right? Which is a real just testament to the passion that you and your family have on this topic, and help making more people, be able to have safe water that will nourish them. And so they don't need to take a bunch of expensive supplements if they're just going to pee out because they're getting it through their water, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because their water's leaching it all from their bones.
I know. It makes me, oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, the policy piece of this is like a whole nother conversation, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Zach, we may definitely have to have you come back on to talk more at another time. But as we wrap up this conversation today, one final question we always ask our guests is, what does the art of living well mean to you?
Something that I've become very important to me lately in order to live well is to really be aware and mindful of this present moment, and less of the past and less of the future. And finding that I have the most peace and the most well-being, and feel like I can have the most fun and be the most creative when I'm here in the present moment, which is not very easy for me, but something that I know is the key to me living a better life. So
beautiful.
Love it.
That's so much I think many people,
Yeah.
that's everyone's goal, is to be living more in the present and experiencing that joy in the day to day and not getting too caught up in the past or the future. Right. I know for
Yeah.
myself, especially.
It's a hard one.
It's a hard one, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where nature helps, right? Like I find
You
that
find
when I'm in
yeah.
nature, I'm very present.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is present. Touching something in nature, grabbing a tree, a branch, leaf, anything will bring you to the present moment.
Yes. Just like being a kid again.
Yeah,
No.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
This
so
was
much,
such
Zach.
an enlightening conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed this a lot. I feel like there's so much more to talk about, but I really enjoyed everything that we talked about. And so thank you again for having me.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
you're
and
welcome.
I'm sure we'll want a part 2 at some point.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right. Have a great day.
Okay. See you later.
Bye-bye.